Hello and welcome back to UnHerd. So DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, is a collection of policies that is supposed to address inequality. It, by now, is deeply embedded in corporations, government agencies across the Western world, and of course, in universities. Well, this week, one of Harvard's most distinguished professors of law and race relations, Randall Kennedy, broke cover to object to the university requiring applicants to make DEI statements. Needless to say, this caused quite a stir. He joins us from Harvard to tell us what he meant. Welcome to UnHerd, Professor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we start, I think it's just worth giving a bit of a sense of your CV, if you don't mind, because it's quite a CV. You are right now the Michael R. Klein Professor of Law at Harvard. You specialize in racial tensions and legal institutions and how those things interplay. You've actually been on the faculty there for 40 years, if I'm not mistaken. This is the 40th anniversary of you joining Harvard faculty in 1984. Before that, you were a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. You did your JD at Yale Law School, Princeton for BA. You're a member of the Bar of the Supreme Court of the United States. You've written no fewer than 7 books on the issues of race, freedom of expression, and law. And you describe yourself in the most recent piece as a scholar of the left committed to struggles for social justice. So I'm reciting all of that just to kind of make it clear that we're not dealing with like an upstart teaching assistant here who's trying to cause some controversy and get some attention. You've been thinking about these things for a long time.
Well, thank you very much for the flattering introduction.
Let's start with the piece last week then. So what is it you are not happy about to do with these DEI statements that applicants need to make?
What I'm not happy about is the following. In many institutions, including parts of my own at Harvard University, if you are seeking to get a teaching position, or if you are seeking promotion, you have to give to the educational authorities evidence of your work. You have to tell them what you're interested in pursuing. You give letters of recommendation, the normal things. But in addition, you are asked to submit a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging statement in which you talk about your understanding of DEI and how you plan to advance it, how you plan to implement it insofar as your teaching is concerned, how you plan to use it in your scholarly work. That is what I object to.
You give some examples in the piece. For example, the Bock Center for Teaching and Learning, which is one of the faculties at Harvard, actually provides the kinds of questions that applicants might want to consider. And I just want to read a few of them out. How does your research engage with and advance the well-being of socially marginalized communities? Do you know how the following operate in the academy? Implicit bias, different forms of privilege, settler colonialism, systemic and interpersonal racism, homophobia, heteropatriarchy, and ableism. Gosh, there's a lot of isms there. The examples continue. But so if you want to advance your career, if you want to get a job at that faculty, you need to demonstrate that kind of stuff.
You're being asked to pledge allegiance to the DEI bureaucracy, the DEI movement, the DEI ethos. Now, frankly, I agree with, many of the ideas that are being, that help animate DEI. The DEI ethos is aimed at resisting age-old prejudices. It's aimed at bringing into our various institutions people who have been marginalized, people who have been excluded before. And, that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. But these DEI statements and other aspects of the DEI bureaucracy are going beyond mere anti-discrimination. What they're doing is they're saying to people, we want you to signal to us that you're on board with what we are attempting to do. Now, especially in a university, it seems to me that that's a big problem. Because after all, there are going to be some people who are not going to be on board with DEI. There are going to be some people. I've talked with physicists. I've talked with, chemists who say, in my line of work, we read about this stuff in the newspaper, but frankly, that's not on my mind. And I don't want to be in the position of making claims or making promises that actually, don't really express the way don't express my pedagogy. And then you've got some people, I'm sure, who don't like the DEI apparatus. I might disagree with them, but I don't think that their position in a university should depend on them, signing on the dotted line and saying that they agree with some set of, institutional values with which they disagree. Imagine I can imagine a political philosopher who says, well, you all are into egalitarianism. Fine. I'm not. I'm anti-egalitarian. Well, what? So we're not going to consider that person for a position? That person may be actually brilliant. That person's lectures, that person's books might enlighten our environment. Even while I'm disagreeing with it, I might still be enlightened by it. But so you're not going to consider that person? The fact of the matter is that as things currently stand, there are a whole lot of places in the United States, and maybe at my own institution, at which having written what I wrote 2 days ago might disqualify me for a position that I have studied for, that I've trained for, that I've invested in. Maybe I've written wonderful work that should make an institution interested in me. But because I have now criticized the DEI apparatus, there are a lot of people who would say, oh no, we don't want this guy. And I'm saying that attitude poses a real threat to academic freedom, poses a real threat to the openness that should be part of, our scholarly, our intellectual, our cultural life.
Do you think it's also intrinsically sort of self-defeating in the sense that it's almost a proxy for your political viewpoint, isn't it? If you're enthusiastically in favor of DEI, you are more likely to be a kind of political progressive. If you have issues with it, you probably are more likely to be conservative. And so is it leading to a more homogenous and less diverse stuff?
Yes, it is. And frankly, in many places, that's its purpose. Again, one of the problems here, and it's a big problem, especially in the university setting. The university setting, we should be about transparency. We should be about making clear, trying to clarify our ideas. We should not be in the obfuscation game. And the fact of the matter is that one of the things going on here is an unstated effort to exclude certain people from, with certain ideological, dispositions, and to boost others. Now, frankly, again, I'm a person on the left. My ideas, to some extent, are ideas that I think, some of the people would like to boost. They don't like this aspect of my thinking. But I don't think we should, that should not be part, none of that should be part of university governance, university selection.
And it's the reason it's become such a culture war, I guess, is that it's the same process in parallel across a lot of areas where it feels like the machinery for people, how people advance through society is now tilted in one direction. It doesn't feel neutral anymore. And it's making people really cross. It's sort of become a big culture war.
It has, and you said a minute ago that it's self-defeating. I think it is self-defeating. I think it's self-defeating on a variety of in a variety of ways. First, it really is incentivizing insincerity. There's a whole cottage industry. If anybody listening, just go to your computers and go to some, go to Chrome, or go to whatever you use to get into the internet. Type in DEI statement and see what comes up. What comes up are dozens, more than hundreds of examples where people are saying, here's what you do. Some people have turned this into a business. There are people who will basically give you a tutorial. They'll give you an essay. They will talk with you. They will, there's a whole cottage industry now of people, firms, and their business is the crafting of DEI statements. Well, that's not good for academia. There's a second way in which it's self-defeating, and that second way in which it's self-defeating, and you alluded to this a minute ago, a lot of academics don't like this. A lot of people are not really, haven't been paying attention, and are surprised, frankly, that this has become so prevalent. And what this is doing is it is generating tremendous resentment against the whole DEI apparatus. And at least in the United States, I don't know what it's like in the United Kingdom, but in the United States, there is a growing sense of antagonism towards DEI. And one of the reasons is because of the people feel put upon. People feel like that their freedoms are being encroached upon, and they don't like it.
So do you observe that at Harvard? I mean, are you in contact with professors and faculty members who haven't spoken in public, but who would privately tell you that they agree with you or that they're unhappy about it? Do you feel there's a sort of underground resistance brewing?
There is an underground resistance. The underground is because it's not going to be underground long, however, because I think there's more and more of a recognition that at least this part of the DEI program has gone awry. I want to emphasize again, we have to keep in mind that DEI did come out of something. It's not as if it just sprang up arbitrarily. It arose because of a well-founded concern about the, exclusionary history, customs, policies of, some of our elite institutions. And people wanted to do something about that. As far as I'm concerned, good.
I mean, I think this is the key question to get into. Do you feel like what people are doing in the world of DEI has gone too far? I mean, the principle of equity is perhaps the most controversial one, which, as I understand it, is trying to reach equality of outcomes, even if that means abandoning meritocratic principles. Do you support that? Are you someone who thinks equity is a good principle for an institution to sign up to?
Couple things. Number one, our institutions have various functions. I have, throughout my adult life, been a defender of affirmative action, a defender of efforts to reach out a helping hand to parts of our populations that have been historically disadvantaged. I defend that. I continue to defend that. You asked me the question, do I think that the DEI apparatus has gone too far? Yes, in certain ways it has gone too far. The worst thing that it has done And again, it's understandable. DEI is like every other bureaucracy. It is, there are people behind it. And, all of us have we have human vices. You have a bureaucracy with some degree of power. What happens when people have some power?
They want more.
Well, yes, they want more. They overreach. They become coercive. They have good, they think that they're right, and they want you to be, they want you to join in with them. And they want, and if you're resisting, they want, there's this tendency, we all have it, to want to force you to be good, force you to be free. And that's what's going on. So with the DEI statement, what's really happening is we just want to hear from you. That's the cover. But no, the reality is we want you to play ball. We want you to show us that you're going to be on our side. And the problem, and by the way, if you're not on our side,
you don't get the job.
You don't get the job. Well, that's what are you talking about? If you're an academic, what more coercion do you want? And that is a big problem.
Just to get back to the sort of actual substance of DEI, though, because I'm so interested in this. If you are a supporter of affirmative action, in some cases or within certain boundaries, is that different from supporting equity as a goal? Explain that difference to us.
Here's where, a difficulty. What do these terms actually mean? Equity. Well, in the law, one of the great benefits of equity is precisely its ambiguity. It's malleable. It can mean lots of different things in lots of different contexts. So, one of the difficulties with, DEI, it's very slippery. A lot of times we don't know what people are talking about. And some of this is strategic. It's purposeful ambiguity. It's purposeful obfuscation. Again, I have been a defender of affirmative action, and I'm a defender of what I would call sensible affirmative action. It's, affirmative action, again, is like any other policy. You can have stupid affirmative action. I'm not for that, just like you can have stupid tax policy. I'm for what I would view as a sensible affirmative action.
And is that specifically targeted towards less advantaged people economically rather than on questions of race, for example? Is that a principle for you? Or do you think race-based affirmative action is also a good thing?
It could be in a lot of different contexts. There are certainly, I'm in favor of showing special solicitude for the white person in America who has, overcome poverty and really improved him or herself. Maybe this person scored a little less than a peer who had everything going for them. Question, do I give something of a boost to the white kid from Appalachia who had to overcome a whole lot, even though at the end of the day, their test score might be a little bit lower than the other kid who had everything going for them? I think it's perfectly sensible to say, gosh, given where this person's coming from.
So we're talking about affirmative action for poor white kids. I'm not sure that's top of the DEI agenda at the moment, but I like the example.
Well, to the extent that it's not, and by the way, you're right. I think that it's not, but that's it. It should be. There are plenty of poor white people in America who have had to overcome and who need a boost too. Now, with racial minorities, I'm a Black American. There are Black Americans who have been marginalized. I think that the effort to show solicitude for this group is perfectly fine. And in terms of, gender, it can be a lot of different dimensions. But, and I think that I get this from, just your question. We always have to be attentive, however, to the purpose of the institution in which we are situated. If we are at an elite research university, we have to be mindful of that and always ask, what ultimately are we trying to accomplish? Imagine a person who really has really overcome a whole lot and tries really hard, but is still at a stage at which they are really not in a position to make good use of the opportunities afforded by an elite university. Well, in my view, in that situation, it would not be a useful to offer a position to that person.
And do you think people like that are being offered positions? Have you noticed over the 40 years that the quality of your intake has deteriorated because they're picked for strange identity questions rather than just the brilliance of their mind?
It is varied. There are some, have I seen affirmative action, which I would view as misplaced affirmative action? Yes, I have. And, the historical record shows that. So there was a time in which people, again, with, good intentions, wanted to make opportunities available, and they made opportunities available. And unfortunately, they, were not careful enough and brought in folks who were not prepared for the institution. So what happened? They flunk out. Well, that's a waste. That's a waste for everybody. I think there are institutions that learned from, that experience and have become, more careful. I think we do have to be careful, and especially in the race area, we have to be careful. In the United States, anytime you use a racial signal to allocate benefits, that's going to trigger a lot of things. A lot of the people who are against affirmative action point to those things, and they point to them, I disagree with them ultimately, but they make a good, it's not like they're being unreasonable. Is there, for instance, a stigmatizing quality that comes with affirmative action? The answer is yes. If you know that people in a certain group are going to get a boost, and then you meet somebody at an institution, these, people of a certain sort are getting a boost, and you in your mind are thinking, is this, did this person get a boost? And if they did get a boost, maybe that indicates that they're just not as, apt, they're not as capable, they're not as skillful, all that sort of thing. People are going to think that, and they're not, it's not stupid for them to think that. It's perfectly logical. Now, in my own view, that is a downside of affirmative action, but I think that the downside is outweighed by upsides. But, are there downsides that come when you use race as a way of allocating benefits, as a way of, giving opportunities
so
to some people?
The yes. Recent Supreme Court ruling then, which went against the idea that universities can do affirmative action based on race, did you support that, or were you upset about it?
I was very critical of it. I think that the Supreme Court of the United States is not attentive enough to the way in which America's long history of racial oppression still shows itself in American life, partly through the presence of ongoing racial prejudice, and partly through the way in which the legacy of past discrimination continues to have a disabling effect on on racial minorities. So I was against the Supreme Court's ruling.
Just to make the other case, though, would it not just be simpler to just put race to one side for these kind of affirmative action programs and just look for disadvantage and try to identify those people who could flourish at a place like Harvard, but you can see that they haven't had the education, and try and pick them, no matter what color they are? And it looks to me from the evidence that most people in America, from the polling, seem to think that's perfectly fair.
I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm very sympathetic to that. Here, if you then say, well, gosh, if you're sympathetic to that, why aren't you throwing down with that? I have a couple of, here are my hesitations. One hesitation is it's a very tricky thing to figure out disadvantage. So let's imagine you have two families in America. A white family, the income is $50,000. Black family, the income is $50,000. Now, income-wise, they're comparable, right? But in America, it turns out that the white family has opportunities that are considerably greater than the black family. In terms of where the white family, for instance, lives, the community that they go to, therefore the schooling that the kids have access to. The black family and the white family, both making $50,000, because, again, of America's complicated racial history, they're not exactly comparable.
Could the opposite not be true? That if the black family that has reached the same income as the white family and their kid is knocking on the door of an institution like Harvard, if anything, they're likely to have quite a supportive home life. They're outperforming for their group, and they may come with advantages that the white family doesn't have.
I think that's a interesting hypothesis that should be followed. I think that the sociology I think the sociological realities in America would suggest that that's simply not the way it goes down in American communities. My point is that in America, we are still grappling with the hidden injuries of race, and I think we need to take that into account. Now, I tell you, if I'm not a person who thinks that racial affirmative action in elite schools is the end-all and be-all. So, for instance, if somebody came to me and said, Kennedy, I tell you what, here's a deal. You give up, you abandon racial affirmative action in higher education, and in return, I will guarantee you excellent kindergarten through high school education for every student in America. Will you go for that deal? I'd go for that deal in a heartbeat. The problem is that deal is not on the table. And I tell you another deal I would go for. I would go for your deal. If somebody said to me, I tell you what, forget about racial affirmative action. You abandon that, and I will guarantee you that we will show solicitude for people who really suffer disadvantage in America. We'll figure out, and we'll get you on. We'll figure out some sort of calculation where we can come to an agreement on what are the 5 things we're going to call that disadvantage. And if you're in that, regardless of race, we're going to give a boost to you. I would be willing to go down with that. Here's one thing that I fear is that some of the people who talk that talk are being disingenuous. They talk that talk on Monday. I give up my claims to racial affirmative action on Tuesday. And then on Friday, I say, okay, well, now it's time for the regime in which we give a break to all the kids who are disadvantaged. And on Friday, they say, well, that's too expensive. Or, well, something else.
So there's a kind of suspicion, there's a first mover question there.
There is. And of course, that's one of the things in America in terms of racial politics that is really quite debilitating. There is suspicion all around. The tremendous amount of suspicion. You mentioned the Supreme Court case. One of the things that was animating the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justices, they're quite clear. They don't believe the universities like they used to. One of the problems with universities, one of the reasons why universities have lost esteem in the American mind, with respect to the American public, is people are, they're not trusting the universities, which is, again, to get back to our point of departure. That's why I think that transparency, I think that candor, I think that just honesty is absolutely essential. Because if we're in an atmosphere of distrust, that's the sort of atmosphere that, gives nurturance to rumor, gives nurturance to conspiracy theorizing, etc.
If we just zoom out for a moment, I'm so interested in this span of time that you've been thinking about these things. How has it changed in the last 4 decades? I mean, it feels to me like the last 5 years, or at least the last 4 years since 2020, have had a very different atmosphere. Is that your experience? How would you kind of characterize the shift?
On the one hand, you have at our institutions of higher education suspicion, resentment, real feelings of alienation. You have, when you go to graduation time at American universities, and you got a whole bunch of different groups that have their own graduations. You don't have, it's not like one big, you have one big one, but you have a whole lot of smaller ones. And
what kind of groups?
Every imaginable affinity group. You have a graduation for the Black kids. You have a graduation for the Native American kids. You have graduation for the Latino kids.
But these are privately arranged, or are they actually endorsed by the university?
In many places, they are endorsed by the university. In my view, that was, I think, a mistake. It's one thing if a group of people want to do their thing, that's one thing. I think, if you start getting the university involved, now it seems to me you're buying trouble. Then you get into stuff like, can this person participate? They say they're such and such a thing, but we don't think that they are. Oh my God. On the one hand, you have racial problems, on our campuses. On the other hand, take a look at university life in the United States. It is very different than it was 50 years ago, certainly 70 years ago. There are, African Americans at every level of university life. The last full president of Harvard University, the most well-known university in America, was for a short time presided over by a Black American woman. Now, that had a very sad end to it. It's an interesting story. On the one hand, was there resentment, racial resentment? And I think in certain ways, do I think that she was the subject of unfair treatment? Yeah, I think she was the subject of unfair treatment. I think that there was considerable amount of, really, in certain ways, really ugly resentment that targeted her. At the same time, the fact of the matter is she was the president of Harvard University. You can't say that How did she get to be president of Harvard University? I mean, obviously, this is not a place that is, you can't say, well, there's rampant racism at Harvard University. How can there be rampant racism at Harvard University if Claudine Gay became president of Harvard University? And she's not alone, by the way. I mean, before she was president of Harvard University, she was the dean of the faculty of Harvard College.
But I mean, on that example, there's a question mark whether she should have been president of Harvard University. Because I'll tell you, from a far onlooker on a different continent, it looked like she had been over-promoted. She didn't have the depth of scholarship behind her. The plagiary charges were terrible. And she didn't perform well at that Senate hearing. She basically was over-promoted. She shouldn't have been in the job. Am I wrong?
I think that you're wrong. I think that there is a lot of sentimentality, a lot of myth-making that surrounds my institution and other institutions of higher education. So, one of the myths, we have a person who has a high administrative position. I think that, people want to try to make it seem as though the person who has the high administrative position is always going to be, the great, outstanding scholar. I think, it would be better if we were realistic and we understood that these institutions are complicated institutions. They require different skill sets. It may very well be that the person who is the head administrative officer does administrative things.
One of the skill sets should have been presentational, doing things well, like appearing at Senate hearings, which I think we can say she didn't really do.
Well, here I would beg to differ with you on two counts. One, I can't remember the last time, and in fact, I think it might have been unprecedented. I think that what happened in Congress was actually quite unprecedented. You had a hostile committee that called university presidents to Washington to grill them. I think it's very interesting, by the way, that all of the university presidents who were called were women. It's true that the people who grilled them were women too, but the university presidents who were called were women. That's a very unusual thing for a college president. I must say, I feel for them. This was, these politicians, it was their turf.
I concede that. I watched the hearing in
You
full.
saw it?
Yeah, Elise Stefanik was definitely laying a trap there, which they walked right into.
And by the way, in my view, I think that the university presidents were acting like I think that they maintained role. Now, people are in this. I think most people higher in academia would disagree with me on this. I think that many people say, listen, they should have known that this was made for TV and they should have acted, accordingly. I think a counter view is, well, they were academics. They were acting like academics. A question was posed to them, and they did not respond in a way that would go down well with middle America watching on TV. Instead, they answered in a very precise academic way that a lot of people would view as inadequate. But frankly, as far as I'm concerned, the way that they responded was proper, given their role and given the institutional setting. It was proper, though it was highly unpopular.
The Black Lives Matter movement, 2020, 2021, looking back on it now, we've had some years for the dust to settle, the evidence to come out. Do you think it was a good thing or a bad thing?
It was good and it was bad. It was good insofar as it put its finger on another real problem in American life, which is the malfeasance of police authorities. That was a sort of its central focus. And it was a good focus because in America, you take a look at the statistics, the degree to which Americans are victimized by criminality and the extent to which Americans are victimized by, police malfeasance is ridiculous. It's a scandal in America. And Black Lives Matter really put a high focus on the problem of police malfeasance. And that, as far as I was concerned, was a real achievement and a good thing. Was there bad? Yeah, there was bad. So I think that Black Lives Matter, some of the people at Black Lives Matter made a mistake, were in error. So for instance, when people talk about, abolishing the police, what do you mean abolishing the police? 300 million people? You have big cities? What, you're going to abolish the police in Manhattan? What are you talking about? Any civilized society needs police. We need good policing. I need protection. If I don't feel secure in my with my property, in my liberty, with my, just physical security, that's miserable. We need good policing. So the idea of abolishing the police was a real digression.
Well, also had real world consequences, didn't it? Because the lighter touch policing led to spikes in violence, which were mainly aimed at African American communities.
There is that. I think there were I think it turned people off. I mean, let me put it like this. My first book was a book called Race, Crime, and the Law. I'm very attentive to, problems of, racial injustice and the administration of racial injustice and the administration of the law in America. That's a central concern of mine. Question: if you have a movement that to some extent alienates me, well, isn't that a sign of a problem?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, if you are saying things, we're going to abolish all the police, we're going to abolish prisons, I'm saying, hold it. I don't want to be on the subway with someone who is a serial killer, a serial assaulter, a serial rapist. And unfortunately, there are thousands, in fact, tens of thousands of such people in America. It's 300 million people. What are we to do? We've got to do something. Now, I don't want people mistreated. I don't want people to be tortured. I don't want people to be, if we can rehabilitate people, let's by all means try to do that. But we must have safety. And I think that some of the people in Black Lives Matter were not attentive enough to that. And we are feeling that. I mean, there has been a real reaction against some of the reformist moves that were made because people want to feel safe.
So I led you on a little digression there, for which I apologize. But you mentioned Claudine Gay as an example, I guess, of improvements over the time you've been there, that this question of racism and race relations, if anything, has been getting better. And would you say it's better than ever? I mean, would you say that America is less racist than at any time in your lifetime?
In certain ways. So, for instance, I'm a law professor. Imagine that, black kid comes to me and says, I'm reading the newspapers. I'm very concerned. Should I go to law school? What does the future hold for me? Should I invest in myself, go to law school, and, do what it takes? I say absolutely. There are more opportunities available to you than have been available to Black American lawyers in the history of the United States. And so go for it. If you're interested in tax, go for it. If you're interested in corporations, go for it. If you want to be a civil rights lawyer, go for it. There is more opportunity for you now than ever. Now, that's at the same time that the United States is racked with real problems. This is an election year. I'm very worried about American democracy, just in general. There are features of American life that it seems to me should be tremendously troubling. One, again, I'm in the education business. The extent to which ignorance and just plain disinformation is part of American life. And here, by the way, I'm not being partisan. I think wherever you are on the political spectrum in America, you ought to be worried that just plain facts have been ignored. We have a knowledge problem, which is all the more reason that, again, to get back to our point of departure, that's all the more reason why education is so significant. It is absolutely essential in a modern, advanced democracy. If you have stupid people, if you have ignorant people, they are going to be susceptible to, demagogy. You want people who are critical thinkers. You want people who are readers. You want people who are going to ask questions. And unfortunately, we don't have enough of that in America. And not only are Americans feeling it, but the world is going to feel it because America is such an important part of the world.
That was Professor Randall Kennedy, a law professor at Harvard University of 40 years standing, who has written 7 books about race relations in the US. And for him to say that even he was alienated by some of the Black Lives Matter protests shows just how strange that conversation has become. Thank you to him, and thanks for tuning in. This was UnHerd.